Okay, good morning, everybody, or afternoon for some of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. See, there's a lot of interest in DNA resilience, so I hope I can shed some light on this test. And if you would like further deeper information, we have a really good trainings just on DNA resilience, which includes your own test, which is a really good way to learn. And it really goes through the pathways in depth and the recommendations as well. So I'm just going to be touching on 2 cases from our practitioners that they have submitted. And we'll just talk a little bit about the cases and how we can implement this test in practice. If you have any questions, I'd love for you to interact, so please just let me know. Okay, so to get started, so the whole idea about the DNA resilience test is really to improve resilience outcomes. And we partnered with a psychologist called Richard Sutton, and he really focuses on businessmen and Olympic athletes and really top performing people and trying to improve their resilience to really make them much stronger and ultimately improve their overall performance. So this is the idea behind the test, and Richard really saw a strong connection into the genetic side, and that's where we started looking into DNA and research, and there really is a lot that we look at here. So when and why do we use DNA resilience? So it's a genetic test targeted at individuals who want to lead more effectively at life. So either in business, in sport, or just in general. They really want to cope better under stressful and demanding conditions, enhance their emotional, mental, and physical health, and live to their fullest potential. So we really want to go from just surviving to thriving. And obviously during the current climate with COVID and the things going on in Ukraine, we really want to optimize our resilience and mental health. So we look at a few different areas and really interesting sort of areas. The first being neuropeptide Y. We look at oxytocin, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which many of you have seen before. We have the stress axis, norepinephrine and dopamine, and then serotonin as well. Okay. And then obviously we look at these genetics, SNPs and susceptibilities, as well as the lifestyle, diet, exercise, and supplement recommendations, and then how we can improve overall health outcomes. Okay, so our first case is a practitioner that submitted her DNA resilience test. And this is really what the summary page looks like. So it's a little bit different in that we are now focusing on areas that are low to moderate. And what that means is there's low to moderate resilience. So we really need to focus on those areas. So it's slightly different from our other tests where we look at focus more at the moderate and high impact. Here we're focusing on low and moderate resilience. So where we can intervene to improve their overall resilience. Okay, so for this practitioner, thank you for submitting your case. Your areas of concern are really neuropeptide Y, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the stress axis, which we'll talk a little bit more about, your dopamine and serotonin. Okay. Then we have a very nice summary page on in the beginning of the report, which really highlights the low resilience areas. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of recommendations, and as we go through the report, it gets even more sort of in detail. So I really like to use this overall summary page, highlight 1 or 2 areas for the patient or client to consider and focus on initially, And then with further consultations, you can go into more detail. But it's really, it's quite overwhelming, the amount of information, particularly for a client. So I really hope that I can sort of break it down a little bit and show you where to focus. Okay. So the first area we start on is neuropeptide Y. So this is a neuropeptide Y is expressed all over the brain, and it's basically, its function is as a neuromodulator. So it really sort of controls the amount of stress and also the perception of stress that we experience. And it's really quite important in counteracting the corticotrophins and the actual HPA stress axis. It almost tries to counteract that and keep it in balance. So it's a really important compound, and we actually want high amounts of neuropeptide Y. It really helps to counteract and balance that sort of stress axis. So we can see here it protects against stress-induced depression, worry, and anxiety. It helps one perform better mentally and physically under pressure, helps you reduce the feeling of pain, and also helps to lower your blood pressure, heart rate, and keep inflammation at bay. But interestingly enough, more levels of neuropeptide Y are actually associated to a sensitivity with leptin. So when you have good expression of neuropeptide Y, and when you're showing high in this area, you actually are less responsive to leptin. And so maybe one of the shortfalls of having a good neuropeptide Y is the inability to regulate your appetite during stress. So these are really the patients that eat a lot, overeat, they don't feel as full, or stress eat, as we like to say, during these stressful periods of time. So something to keep in mind: if you are low or moderate, you are more sensitive to leptin and helps to regulate your appetite better. Okay, it also exerts an influence on obesity by creating new fat cells. So a very interesting gene, and really the CC allele, where we see a C, has the risk for lower levels of neuropeptide Y. Okay. So neuropeptide Y may be indirectly targeted through modification of your gut microbiota. So this is really a very important focus area for neuropeptide Y. We want to try firstly and improve gut health, and secondly, keep inflammation as low as we can. And so use of probiotics is really beneficial for neuropeptide Y. So gut health in this area is probably your most important focus. We also want to limit your intake of animal protein, because specifically your saturated fats can increase that inflammation, and focus on good amounts of folate and vitamin Bs. So this is really shown to increase the expression of neuropeptide Y. Then intermittent fasting or calorie restriction also been beneficial and shown to improve the expression of neuropeptide Y. Okay, specifically for supplements, we again focusing on your B vitamins, very important. So something like methylfolate, then the curcumin to control that inflammation. And then we have recommended in the report adaptogens. So we don't actually specify the types of adaptogens in the report, because it's very important that the healthcare practitioner takes control and feels comfortable with the use of adaptogens. So specifically to produce neuropeptide Y and improve the function of neuropeptide Y, these 4 adaptogens, your curcumin, your rhodiola rosea, your Eleutherococcus staphylococcus, and your Cyanornis sinensis, are really important and helpful to managing neuropeptide Y and increasing the amount of neuropeptide Y. But obviously, we don't want to use adaptogens for all patients, and we really want to try and do the food first or supplement first approach. And really only those practitioners who are comfortable with adaptogens could use these then. Okay, so overall we have our strengths and hurdles. So for people with a low expression or moderate expression of neuropeptide Y, you generally have that protection against regulating your appetite, but you may have an increased risk for stress and anxiety, low mood during stressful situations, as well as expressing pain as well. So then there's another aspect to stress, which is definitely your immune system, and specifically with a lower expression of neuropeptide Y, we have increased inflammation, which then affects that immune system. So these are the recommendations that I've just spoken about, and something that will really come up quite often is stimulating the vagal nerve. So if we look under lifestyle, it talks about a cold shower, but we'll chat a little bit about that as we go along. Really that cold water immersion really helping to stimulate the vagal nerve, which then helps to increase your neuropeptide expression. Okay. Right, moving on to the next area, which is your brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So this is a very important molecule, and where there's a variation here, the patient or practitioner or client is actually not expressing as much BDNF as we would like. So BDNF is really important in the neuroelasticity and plasticity of the brain. So very important in memory, IQ, reading, retention, your cognitive ability and potential, and then very much a part in mood and depression. And this is actually the target gene for lithium when they use it for bipolar disorder, because lithium helps to increase BDNF levels. So very, very much associated with mood as well. Okay, so if you have a lower expression of BDNF, you generally can be positively influenced, and you can really make lifestyle changes to really considerably increase your BDNF levels. Some of the hurdles that these patients might come up with are prolonged stress, anxiety, and mood disorder, reduced adaptability and that mental agility, erratic memory, reduced expression of cognitive potential, and the stress can trigger compromised reading and learning abilities. So how do we improve BDNF and increase the amounts of BDNF that we produce? The Mediterranean diet has really shown to have a very positive effect on BDNF. So that means lots of vegetables, lots of fiber, and lots of oily fatty fish, which is your omega-3. And then what's really important with BDNF is actually calorie restriction or intermittent fasting. So the results or research has really shown that intermittent fasting can really boost BDNF levels. So something to really consider here with these patients. Then in terms of exercise, another very important area, again, to increase your BDNF and by up to 60%, is high intensity exercise. So these are the patients that really feel the runner's high. They get a very good feeling after exercise, especially high intensity, because we are now increasing the expression of BDNF. So very important and easy way to increase those levels. And then we want to make sure vitamin D is good. So in terms of lifestyle, lots of sunlight, and really important for these clients to keep the brain active. So lots of new skills, learning a new sport or language or reading or doing puzzles and that sort of thing. And then we also know that green tea and cacao can also activate BDNF. So those are two compounds that we can incorporate in our diet. In terms of supplements, we know that curcumin and omega-3 can be very helpful in managing inflammation and also just helping to increase the expression of BDNF. And then again, your adaptogens coming in that can assist with BDNF production and managing general stress. Then quercetin, also a very interesting compound, can also help with the inflammation, oxidative stress, and aid with BDNF. But we just know that quercetin can actually downregulate COMT, which I'll speak about later. So just be mindful of the patient's COMT results. If they have a slow COMT, then we want to avoid quercetin. Okay. Then we move on to the stress axis. So this is really about your HPA axis, your glucocorticoids, steroids, managing that balance. And we obviously need the glucocorticoid steroids, but we really want to try and keep them within balance and not chronically elevated. So FKBP5 is really
Karen,
yeah.
Can I stop you? For BDNF, if it's high, are there any downsides to it?
No.
Okay.
No, the more BDNF we want, the better.
Okay.
So even if you genetically have better levels of BDNF, still doing exercise and intermittent fasting will still increase your BDNF levels.
Okay.
So, the more BDNF we have, the better for everybody.
Sure. Thanks.
Okay, so FKBP5 is really about regulating your adrenal hormones, and it's really a protector of your HPA axis. So if we have a stressor, it activates FKBP5, and that really sort of causes this cascade of this glucocorticoid and HPA axis imbalance. Okay. So really those, it's all about fight or flight. And so that's why I say that we need these cortical adrenal hormones, but we really want to keep them in balance. So for those who have a altered function of FKBP5, we really need to focus on managing the stress, managing the corticosteroid hormones, and keeping them in balance. So these patients have an increased risk for worry, anxiety, low mood, and depression, specifically in stressful situations, and then raised inflammation and increased risk for immune disorders. So yeah, very similar to the other compounds that we've been talking about. Okay, in terms of intervention, FKBP5 is mainly expressed in fat cells. So we really want to make sure that the patient has a healthy fat percentage so that we manage the expression of FKBP5. And in order to do that, we really want to focus on a healthy diet, limit alcohol, and lots of fruits and vegetables as well. Then in terms of exercise, always valuable for any stressful situation, not as important here, but really swimming and yoga have really shown to be very beneficial for carriers of this SNP, really to help sort of wind down and manage that glucocorticoid or adrenal response. Okay. And then in terms of supplements, your NAC being very effective, vitamin D as well, so sunshine also being important, and then your zinc, magnesium, and omega-3. And then something that I spoke about previously, I mentioned, is the vagal nerve activation. So this is that deep breathing, your meditation, or possibly that cold water immersion. And this is really why swimming and yoga have come up specifically for exercise, is because they're shown to be very good vagal activators. So these are sort of areas that the patient can focus on here.
Hey, Karen, can I ask something?
Yes.
I have a high contribution to resilience in this stress axis, but I still have the same like recommendations and everything in this section.
Okay.
Like compared to other parts in this report. So I'm wondering why.
Okay, have any of the gene impacts come up there in this area for you, or are they all low?
One gene has, I guess, like one allele that has this like negative, but like overall result is high contribution, but is it because of this one?
Yeah.
Gene? Okay.
So when the software pulls the report, then if there is a variation, then it will be included in the report. So I like to look at the report in a whole and focus on the area as a whole and not specific genes. But some practitioners would like to know a bit more on the specific gene and the recommendations for that. So we do include it in the report. But as a whole, if you've come out with high resilience, I wouldn't really focus on that area.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, then we move on to CRHR, which is your corticotropin releasing hormone. And this is really also very important in that stress response and the HPA axis. So here it's very important in the gut and has a strong association with gut conditions and immune response, specifically in the gut. So when you see variations here, you can remember CRHR and gut implications. And really in the evidence, it's really showing a higher risk for IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. But it also plays a very important role in response to stress, cognition, and memory. But yeah, the most important really being that immune and link to gut. So if you have a variation here, you do have some strength in that you can really, again, put these proactive measures and these interventions in to help balance the stress axis. Then there's also a degree of protection against these digestive disorders with certain variations. So the risk here is with your G and C. So the first area will be your CT. So the C is the risk, and the GT is the G is the risk. And there we found that the G can actually be protective against these gut-induced disorders. Okay, but overall we have increased risk for high stress response and specifically with gut coming up. Okay, so we really want to try and avoid processed sugars, really focus on the gut and gut health. So a good amount of pre and probiotics in the diet, so your fermented foods and that sort of thing. Again, the green tea and cacao or dark chocolate really being a benefit in managing the HPA stress axis. Then the high intensity exercise can help raise lactic acid, which has been sort of linked to a slower release of these stress hormones. Again, the swimming and yoga and that vagal nerve stimulation being very important. And then there are some supplements like zinc, magnesium, vitamin C, and omega-3, and then again some adaptogens that have shown a positive expression or a positive effect on the expression of these genes. Okay, so here we have your adaptogens, again, use with caution, and only if you are very familiar with the use of adaptogens, but your rhodiola, your Schisandra schizonensis, and your Bacopa monneria. Okay. Right, then we move on to dopamine. So we really look at dopamine in two areas. We look at your dopamine receptor 2 and your dopamine receptor 4. And then we also look at the COMT gene. So we know COMT, I'll speak a bit about it in detail, is a catecholamine transferase, and really is responsible for breaking down these catecholamine or stress hormones. So first we look at DRD2. So essentially, if there's a variation on this gene, we know that there is a sort of misshapen gene, and the it's not performing as adequately as we would like. So dopamine is really important for sleep, for memory, for learning, focus, just general emotional well-being, and essential for motivation, performance, and then just general resilience in stressful situations. So DRD2 has a major influence on dopamine levels in the brain. It regulates your behavior and emotions, and it has a strong link to resilience. It also promotes cognition, memory, learning, and movement potential, and modulates your overall neurochemical and hormonal balance. So those with the T variation actually are more responsive to cognitive training and motivated by positive rewards, where those with a variation may actually overconsume food. So the whole idea behind the DRD receptors 2 and 4 is that because they are slightly misshapen, they generally need a higher stimuli to secrete as much dopamine. So the stimuli generally in most people being either binge eating or sugary foods. And obviously we get more cravings and need more sugary foods to bind to this misshapen protein so that we get that same suitable dopamine response. And so that's the link specifically with food and sugary foods, but every person is different, and the trigger can be other substances as well. And then this gene is also associated with PTSD, which is your post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's that impulse or thrill-seeking, novelty-seeking behavior, and really that's generally what we see with patients with this variation. In terms of recommendations, we really want to focus on good eating habits, helping the patient stay fuller for longer, so preventing that binge eating, really focusing on avoiding your processed and refined foods, and maintaining a good glucose blood level so that they don't get too many cravings. So lots of variety, lots of fiber, again, general exercise recommendations, nothing specific here. Meditation is really beneficial, and music can really help in terms of distraction and just general well-being of these dopamine receptors. And then some supplements that have been shown to improve DRD2 expression are your omega-3, vitamin D, and good methylation. So if we have enough B complex vitamins and SAMe, which is your methyl donor, then we generally have a good response on dopamine. Okay. So here we have the supplements already discussed, and then your adaptogens being curcumin, ginseng, and resveratrol. And this is where inflammation really also plays a role in the receptor function. So that's why the curcumin, resveratrol, and omega-3 being quite important here. Okay. And then we move on to COMT. So COMT, as I said, is really responsible for the breakdown of dopamine, your epinephrine and norepinephrine. And it's really important in anxiety, mood stability, and then your cognitive ability as well. So with a 75% reduction in enzyme activity, if you are AA genotype, so you have a very slow COMT and a very slow breakdown of these catecholamines, then you're likely to have better cognitive abilities because the breakdown is slow, but increased risk for things like anxiety. Okay, so too much dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine can trigger this this sort of anxiety response, worry, despair, and an exaggerated stress response. So in terms of COMT recommendations, I mentioned quercetin earlier. So we want to try and avoid quercetin supplementation because that has been shown to reduce COMT function even further. But what can really help support COMT function is magnesium. So magnesium being very important for COMT, it's the cofactor for COMT. And then caffeine can also add additional load to COMT. So really trying to avoid too much caffeine as much as possible from the diet so that COMT can really focus on these catecholamines and not having to do with extra stimulants and substances that it needs to work on.
Can I ask a question? The magnesium type, does that have an impact? Which kind of magnesium you would use for COMT?
Not specifically, but I always recommend the conjugated. So with an amino acid, the absorption is much better. But obviously some patients are more sensitive, especially with gut health. So you would just need to find one that works better for you. But generally just magnesium works very well. And you'll see a slow COMT user will definitely be sensitive to caffeine. So they probably naturally would have decreased their caffeine intake, but they really do benefit from magnesium to help sleep and calm, and even a good Epsom salt bath can be very helpful if they're already taking a number of supplements.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right, then we move on to serotonin. So here we look at 4 genes in the serotonin pathway. And generally the recommendations are sort of the same for all of them in that we know that 90% of our serotonin is produced in the gut. So gut health is of utmost importance in production of serotonin. So that's really the number one sort of idea to be at the back of your minds. Okay, so the first area is the tryptophan conversion. So it's the pre-step to making serotonin, where we are converting tryptophan. So it's obviously tryptophan being very important, and we already know it's a precursor to serotonin. But we know that serotonin really important in mood and emotional stability, decision-making, your sensory gating, so, preventing irrelevant information from overwhelming the brain. So really blocking out these overwhelming triggers, and then regulating behavior and impulsivity as well. So if you have a GG genotype, you actually may have elevated levels of serotonin, good cognitive function, which is really nice, and then the ability to learn new tasks and keep that brain active. And there's an association with few aggressive tendencies with more serotonin, being more sociable, good energy levels, and good recovery and healing. So in terms of hurdles, these patients may be prone to stress-induced anxiety, a likelihood of depression, and panic disorders with the T allele. And these two this gene or the whole area plays a role on BDNF levels. So if you have poor serotonin, you're also likely to have poor BDNF. So we kind of want to focus on both areas at the same time. So, and we can also look at GABA levels as well, keeping all three in balance. So in terms of recommendations, obviously tryptophan being very important, which we generally get from our protein sources, then our meditation and yoga being quite important in terms of that vagal nerve stimulation. And then, you know, exercise doesn't have a direct effect on TPH2, but we want exercise to improve your BDNF and your GABA. So that's the link. So that high intensity exercise really important for BDNF and GABA. Okay. And then in terms of supplements, again, focusing on BDNF here, and we saw those recommendations with your omega-3, your magnesium, your curcumin for BDNF, and then your various adaptogens that can be beneficial here. Okay. So these are the supplements I spoke about, and then in terms of your adaptogens to produce more GABA, support GABA, we look at ashwagandha, skullcap, and valerian. And then for BDNF expression is the curcumin and ginseng. Okay, and then we look at the HTR1A, which is really the precursor of serotonin. So we're now taking our tryptophan from the TPH2, and we are now converting it into the serotonin. So, you know, these patients with variations here generally have less serotonin production and the associated risks for that. So reduced resilience, risk for stress, related emotional disorders, so your depression, your anxiety, aggression, compulsive behaviors, panic, OCD, and eating disorders. They also have the reduced ability to regulate their stress response and reduce cognitive potential. And that's all because of a decreased production of serotonin. So what do we do for these patients? What's really important here is the Mediterranean diet and lots of tryptophan-rich foods. Again, exercise more important in general stress well-being and management of stress. Then lifestyle, really important to connect with people, to share experiences, and your cognitive behavioral therapy, really important in managing your stress levels. And again, music can be very beneficial here and increase production of serotonin. In terms of supplements, we look at omega-3, your magnesium, vitamin D being very important, and then a good amount of methylation compounds, so your B vitamins being very important. In terms of the adaptogens, we look at rhodiola, curcumin, bacopa, and ginseng. Okay. Okay, so to summarize this practitioner's results, here we have a nice summary of the areas that I've just spoken about, but to just highlight some areas that overlap and that we can really focus on for in your case, a patient to take home. Things that come up most often are the Mediterranean style diet. So here we're ensuring lots of green leafy veg, lots of B vitamins. Your intake of fatty fish is generally higher, and your saturated fat is generally lower in the Mediterranean diet. Then we want to limit or avoid sugar, specifically for that dopamine receptor that we spoke about, and decrease caffeine for the COMT. Okay. In terms of supplements, frequently coming up here are your B complex, so for methylation being very important, your omega-3 and curcumin to manage that inflammation, your vitamin D, zinc, and then magnesium, also very important. Okay, in terms of exercise, we spoke about that high intensity exercise to increase levels of BDNF, and your yoga or swimming to also help manage that stress and that HPA axis. And then really important is your meditation, social support, and helping others. And very important in stress management is actually spending time in nature. So that can help balance that HPA axis. Okay, so that's the first case. Thank you to the practitioner who submitted it. Do we have any questions there? There's one in the chat. Okay, so we have a good point here from Marie. She says that she understands with a slow comp that you should avoid quercetin, but in the test it says that you should increase quercetin-rich foods. So generally with COMT, it is about avoiding supplementation of quercetin. We don't ever really want to avoid quercetin-rich foods because they are rich in so many other nutrients. So it's generally more about the supplementation of quercetin, which we do for antioxidant support and inflammation support. But specifically, if you see a slow comp, then that's when we would avoid supplementation, because it does generally tend to slow comp down even further. Okay. Right, then we move on to our next case. So this is Lady X, again, having issues or just a lower resilience score in the neuropeptide Y, which we've already spoken about. Something new to consider we'll talk about now is your oxytocin. We spoke about the stress axis previously, and we spoke about serotonin. So I'm really just going to, focus on oxytocin. This is one of the newer areas that we didn't speak about. Again, a very similar recommendation summary table, which is really nice. And then I do just urge you to not overwhelm the patient with too much information. So focus on one or two areas in each category that the patient can go home and focus on. Okay, so neuropeptide Y, we spoke about. This is really about protection against helping resilience and against stress. So we've already discussed this, really focusing on your intermittent fasting, your folate, curcumin, and those adaptogens that we spoke about. Okay. So with oxytocin, if there's a moderate resilience score, just meaning that there's altered function to the oxytocin receptor. And so we don't get the same great benefits that we do with a normal receptor function. Obviously, we know oxytocin really important in managing pain during labor, milk letdown. Really, it helps increase serotonin and BDNF production, so really important in mood stability. And oxytocin also helps to decrease inflammation and oxidative stress. So we really want to enhance oxytocin because of its excellent benefits. Okay, so overall, with a variation on this gene, we have a decreased binding of oxytocin and an overall increased risk of stress-induced oxytocin. Okay, and this is really about empathy, trust, self-belief, self-esteem. So patients with a variation here, you will see these kind of behaviors showing with them. What's really important here is spending time with other people. So the most important focus area for oxytocin is really social exposure, hugging, spending time in nature, physical contact, and we know that really increases the production of oxytocin. Okay, and then general foods that also help increase oxytocin and improve your general receptor function is magnesium and vitamin C. So foods that really focus on these nutrients are important. So your nuts and seeds, citrus fruit, that sort of thing, to get enough magnesium and vitamin C. And then we also know that diet increases or improves oxytocin expression. So at least 10 minutes or longer of your aerobic exercise, and then yoga also beneficial for increasing this oxytocin. And then, yeah, really the most important area here is socializing, being with people, physical contact, that sort of thing. Okay, the stress axis we spoke about, you can see here this patient just having variations on FKBP5. And so we really just focus on that area and improving resilience with your aerobic exercise, your yoga, your swimming, your vagal nerve activation. Okay. And then again, serotonin, we spoke about, there's just one extra variation that we haven't touched on. So the HTTLPR, so I'll go to that. And this is also just about production of serotonin and really the transport of serotonin. So just your way to manage serotonin and get it around the body. And again, that serotonin link very close to BDNF, oxytocin and GABA. So focus, in terms of intervention, we again then go back to BDNF interventions, your high intensity exercise, your intermittent fasting being very important. Okay, in terms of adaptogens that modulate the SERT expression are your berberine and your Bacopa monourea. Okay, then also your omega-3, magnesium, and vitamin C for the actual receptor function.
One question.
Yes.
If the BDNF is good, do we still need to consider trying to get it higher for the serotonin?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So BDNF is always going to help production of serotonin. So if there's issues with serotonin, we always go back to BDNF, and you'll see the interventions always overlap. So generally, your question is right in that we then focus on BDNF to improve the serotonin levels. Okay. And then we spoke about TPH2. This is your tryptophan encoding gene. We have the HTR1A, which we spoke about as well. And then overall summary, again, we take the most important to provide for the patient. So generally, in this case, would be your intermittent fasting, your magnesium and vitamin C rich foods, your methylation and B compounds being very important, omega-3 again coming up to improve receptor function, possible adaptogens in each area, and really important is that vagus nerve stimulation. Okay. So yeah, then the Mediterranean style diet, your vitamin B, omega-3, D, magnesium, and adaptogens, your high intensity exercise specifically for that BDNF, and the vagal nerve stimulation. And then for oxytocin, that physical contact and acts of goodwill will also be very important. So overall, sending a patient home with a plan to improve resilience we're really going to focus on a general good diet of generally a Mediterranean diet. We may now include this intermittent fasting for most patients because I generally see some issues with BDNF and issues with serotonin. Those are very common to see. So that intermittent fasting being quite helpful there. We always want good methylation and B complex, those B vitamins, very important to manage the production of methyl groups and also our precursors to our stress hormones and our mood hormones. Magnesium, you can see being very important for most patients in the stress response. And then again, for those comfortable, we can use those adaptogens. In terms of exercise, really alternating between high intensity training. So this is really a half an hour of really pushing their heart rate up as high as possible. And then incorporating your yoga or swimming or more meditative exercises there. And then in terms of lifestyle, that vagal nerve stimulation being shown excellent results in resilience and stress management. And the easiest way to really do that at home is, at the end of your hot shower in the morning, turn the tap to cold for 30 to 60 seconds. And we really start to stimulate that vagus nerve. So that's the overall DNA resilience. And if it's, showing you some interest, I really encourage you to do the DNA resilience training. It's about 8 hours worth of training, and it really goes into in-depth descriptions of the genes and where they work and how they work, and then these recommendations. Okay. And yes, I'm here for you guys. I'm happy to help you along the way. So if you have individual cases or any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. Right, any questions from you guys? Okay, thank you so much for your time. And
Karen, there was that question about the relevance of DNA resilience in regards to neuro.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had a question about neurodegenerative disorders and if we would use DNA resilience in that case. So for me, DNA resilience is more about stress, insight, mood, and just overall resilience. So for most of us these days who are struggling after the pandemic and the stress of war and things that are coming up, for people who just want to feel better, improve their mood, or are just struggling to get out of this sort of low mood and stress and anxiety. Whereas for neurodegenerative disease, I would focus more on DNA Mind. So the DNA Mind test looks at a couple of these genes, but a few more, and inflammation and ApoE, and really showing a higher insight into risk for neurodegenerative disease. So those are the two differences between the two tests. Okay.
I guess you can say that you could do both.
Yeah. So for
in
me,
some cases.
With DNA, the more results you have, the more insight and more information you have. So for me, I would always do a DNA health test. That's my personal opinion, and then add on to that. So in the case, if you're seeing a patient specifically struggling with stress and anxiety and depression, resilience can be very helpful. If you're seeing a patient struggling with neurodegenerative or addiction, or they're worried about a family history, then DNA Mind is very helpful. If you're looking at hormone balance and an estrogen dominance condition, then DNA Estrogen is very helpful. If you're looking for weight loss or weight management, then DNA Diet is very helpful there. So I always like to start with the base of DNA health and then add on the relevant tests according to the patient's needs or interests. Sometimes they just want to know everything.
Thank you, Karen.
Good. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a lovely week, and I will see you next month for DNA Smile.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.